Money doesn't reveal character, Nathaniel Brooks said quietly as four matte black credit cards rested on the polished walnut table beneath the glow of the penthouse lights. It only gives people permission to show who they already are. No one in the room smiled. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath a cold autumn sunset, its skyline painted in gold and steel, while inside the private dining room of Brooks Capital, silence settled like a challenge waiting to be accepted. Four women stood several feet apart, each holding a different place in Nathaniel's world, yet none of them knew why they had been invited. Olivia Harper, a fashion influencer with millions of followers, carried herself with effortless confidence. Vanessa Collins, a respected corporate attorney, watched everything with careful eyes, already trying to calculate the purpose behind the gathering. Sophie Reynolds, an aspiring luxury real estate agent, wore the kind of smile that appeared polished through years of networking with wealthy clients. At the end of the line stood Claire Bennett, the quiet maid who had worked in Nathaniel's estate for nearly 3 years. Her simple navy housekeeping uniform looked almost invisible beside the tailored dresses worn by the others. She folded her hands neatly in front of her, saying nothing, her expression calm, almost detached, as though she expected nothing extraordinary to happen today. Nathaniel stepped closer to the table and gently pushed one black card toward each woman. American Express Centurion, one of the rarest financial symbols in the country. A card recognized in luxury boutiques, private aviation terminals, exclusive resorts, and high-end dealerships across America. Most people spent years dreaming of seeing one. Today there were 4. Each card has more than enough available credit, Nathaniel said. There are no spending limits for this test. Buy whatever you want. Jewelry, cars, designer collections, art, travel, investments. I don't care. You have exactly 24 hours. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, you'll come back with your receipts. Olivia's eyes widened for the briefest moment before excitement replaced surprise. Sophie exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa, who raised one eyebrow but remained silent. Claire simply looked down at the card resting before her, almost as if she were studying an object that belonged to someone else. Nathaniel noticed that reaction immediately. Most people stared at the impossible possibilities. Claire stared at the responsibility. There's only one rule, Nathaniel continued. You cannot give the card away, and you cannot ask me what I'm looking for. There are no right answers. Olivia laughed softly. So this is basically a shopping challenge? Nathaniel answered with a faint smile. If that's how you choose to see it. Sophie picked up her card first, already imagining boutiques on Fifth Avenue. Vanessa slipped hers carefully into her leather portfolio, her mind clearly working several steps ahead. Claire waited until everyone else had taken theirs before reaching forward. She held the black card gently between 2 fingers, almost cautiously, then placed it inside the worn fabric wallet she had carried for years. Nathaniel watched every movement without saying a word. It was a tiny gesture, barely noticeable, yet something about the way she handled the card felt completely different from the others. The meeting ended less than 5 minutes later. One by one, the women left the skyscraper overlooking Midtown. Olivia called her stylist before the elevator doors closed. Sophie texted 3 luxury dealerships within moments. Vanessa opened financial market reports as she walked through the marble lobby. Claire stepped outside into the cool evening air, pulled her light gray coat a little tighter against the wind, and quietly boarded a downtown subway train instead of calling a car. Nathaniel remained alone in the conference room long after everyone had gone. His assistant entered carrying a tablet. "Should I activate transaction monitoring, sir?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded once. "Real-time notifications. You expect something unusual?" He looked toward the city lights without answering immediately. "No," he finally said. "I expect exactly what money usually brings out in people." The assistant walked away, leaving him alone with the silent skyline. Less than 45 minutes later, the first notification appeared. Then another. Then another. Fifth Avenue. Madison Avenue. Luxury watches. Designer handbags. Premium dealerships. Private jewelry salons. The transactions arrived almost too quickly to read. Nathaniel barely reacted. Everything unfolded exactly as he had predicted. Then he noticed one name missing from the screen. Claire Bennett. Hours passed. Evening became night. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved across 3 black cards. The 4th remained completely untouched. Nathaniel leaned back slowly, studying the empty space where Claire's name should have appeared. For the first time that day, curiosity quietly replaced certainty. Nathaniel Brooks had built an empire by believing that every decision left a trail, and every trail eventually revealed the truth. By 7 o'clock the next morning, the first reports were already waiting on his desk. His executive assistant, Margaret Ellis, entered quietly carrying a digital tablet and a fresh cup of black coffee. She placed both on the polished desk without interrupting his thoughts. The city outside was just beginning to wake. Yellow taxis flowed through the streets below like streams of light, while the early sun reflected across the glass towers of Midtown. Nathaniel reached for the tablet and opened the transaction log. Olivia Harper had started shopping less than an hour after leaving Brooks Capital. A limited edition handbag from Madison Avenue, a diamond bracelet, designer shoes, a luxury wellness retreat in Aspen. The total continued climbing with every swipe. Nathaniel simply nodded. There was no surprise in his expression. Olivia had chosen experiences that reflected the life she already wanted the world to see. The second report belonged to Sophie Reynolds. She had reserved a new European sports car, paid a deposit on an upscale condominium overlooking Central Park, and purchased several tailored business wardrobes from exclusive boutiques. Nathaniel noticed the pattern immediately. Sophie was buying confidence. Every purchase was another step toward becoming the successful professional she imagined herself to be. Again, he showed no reaction. Vanessa Collins proved more disciplined. She avoided jewelry and luxury fashion almost entirely. Instead, she invested in several high-performing funds, purchased rare financial publications, and secured a year of executive leadership coaching. Nathaniel leaned back slightly. Of the three, Vanessa had spent the least, yet every dollar reflected calculation rather than impulse. He respected that. Even so, none of it challenged his expectations. Margaret glanced toward him. "Would you like a summary comparison?" Nathaniel shook his head. "Not yet." She hesitated before speaking again. "There is still nothing from Claire Bennett." Nathaniel looked down at the screen. Claire's transaction history remained completely blank. Not a single coffee, not a subway ticket, not even breakfast. The card looked as though it had never been activated. "She has had almost 18 hours, Margaret said softly. "Perhaps she is afraid to use it." Nathaniel folded his hands together. Fear and restraint often look identical until the moment someone makes a choice. Margaret offered a polite smile before leaving the office. Nathaniel remained alone, staring at the untouched account. Throughout the day, more notifications arrived from the other three cards. Olivia upgraded her hotel reservation. Sophie purchased custom furniture. Vanessa expanded her investment portfolio after speaking with a financial advisor. Every alert produced another predictable chapter in the same familiar story. Yet Claire's account remained silent. By late afternoon, Nathaniel found himself checking the screen more often than he cared to admit. Curiosity had become an unwelcome companion. At 4:37 in the afternoon, a single notification finally appeared. Nathaniel straightened immediately. One transaction. Authorized. Approved. He opened the details without hesitation. The amount was so small compared to the other purchases that he frowned. It was not even 1% of what the others had spent. There was no recognizable luxury retailer attached to the payment. No famous brand. No exclusive address. Instead, the merchant name appeared as a modest community financial services office located nearly 70 miles north of Manhattan in a town he had never visited. Nathaniel enlarged the receipt on the screen. The description revealed almost nothing beyond a reference number and a payment confirmation. No merchandise. No reservation. No explanation. He checked again, convinced there had to be additional activity waiting to post. There was none. One transaction. Then complete silence. He tapped the desk gently with one finger, the habit that always appeared whenever something refused to fit his understanding. "Interesting," he whispered to the empty office. It was the first word he had spoken to himself all day. Outside, evening shadows slowly stretched across the skyline, while inside Brooks Capital, one tiny receipt weighing almost nothing had somehow become heavier than every luxury purchase made before it. The following morning arrived with a gray sky stretching over Manhattan as though the city itself had decided to slow down. At exactly 6 o'clock, the four women returned to Brooks Capital one after another, each carrying a folder filled with receipts. The private conference room looked exactly as it had 24 hours earlier. The same polished walnut table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same quiet confidence surrounding Nathaniel Brooks. Yet something had changed. Nathaniel no longer looked at the women with certainty. He looked at them with questions. Olivia Harper arrived first, dressed in an elegant cream-colored coat that matched the luxury shopping bags carried by an assistant behind her. She smiled as she placed her receipts neatly on the table. "I decided life is too short to postpone dreams," she said. Nathaniel glanced through the pages. Everything matched the transaction reports he had already reviewed. Beautiful purchases. Predictable choices. "Thank you," he replied calmly before setting the folder aside. Sophie Reynolds approached next. She explained every purchase with remarkable enthusiasm. The condominium reservation, the business wardrobe, the vehicle that would help her meet wealthy clients with greater confidence. Nathaniel listened carefully. Her reasoning was practical, logical, ambitious. He respected every decision even if none of them surprised him. Vanessa Collins spoke with her usual precision. She described market forecasts, long-term returns, and calculated investments that she believed would multiply the opportunity she had been given. Nathaniel nodded more than once. "You planned every dollar before spending it," he observed. Vanessa smiled politely. Money is most powerful when emotion does not control it. Nathaniel appreciated the answer. Then the room became quiet. Claire Bennett stepped forward carrying only a small white envelope. No shopping bags. No presentation. No speech prepared in advance. She quietly placed the envelope on the table and stepped back. Nathaniel opened it. Inside rested a single receipt printed on ordinary paper. No luxury logo. No polished branding. No elegant packaging. Only a payment confirmation with an unfamiliar account number and the name of a community financial services office located in the Hudson Valley. Nathaniel looked up. "Is this everything?" Claire answered softly. "Yes, sir." Olivia exchanged a puzzled glance with Sophie. Vanessa leaned slightly forward, equally curious. Nathaniel studied the receipt again. "You spent less than 1% of what was available on the card." Claire simply nodded. "Yes, sir." "Why?" She lowered her eyes for only a moment before answering. "Because it was enough." The simplicity of those words lingered in the room. Nathaniel had expected explanations, regrets, excuses. Instead, he received 4 quiet words delivered without hesitation. Because it was enough. He folded the receipt carefully and placed it back into the envelope. "You understand that I gave each of you complete freedom," he said. "You could have purchased almost anything." Claire met his eyes with calm sincerity. "I know. And this is what you chose." "Yes, sir." Nathaniel remained silent for several seconds. Something about her composure unsettled him. She was not trying to impress him. She was not defending herself. She appeared perfectly comfortable allowing her decision to stand without decoration. Most people filled silence because they feared judgment. Claire seemed completely at peace with it. After dismissing the meeting, Nathaniel watched the women leave one by one. Olivia discussed dinner plans over her phone before entering the elevator. Sophie was already speaking with a mortgage advisor. Vanessa returned to her law office with measured confidence. Claire quietly buttoned her coat, thanked the receptionist for her kindness, and walked alone toward the subway station carrying the same small handbag she had arrived with the day before. Nathaniel remained standing beside the conference room window until Margaret entered once more. "Would you like me to close the files, sir?" she asked. Nathaniel slowly shook his head. His eyes never left the single white envelope resting alone on the table. "No," he answered quietly. "I want to know where that payment really went." For the first time since creating the test, he realized the most valuable answer had not been found inside the receipts that filled entire folders. It was hidden inside the smallest receipt in the room. The white envelope remained on Nathaniel Brooks's desk long after the conference room had emptied. Outside, Manhattan settled into another brilliant evening, but the city lights failed to pull his attention away from the single receipt lying before him. 3 folders filled with expensive purchases had already been archived. Luxury watches, designer collections, investment portfolios, and real estate reservations all fit comfortably inside the patterns he had spent decades studying. Yet this one ordinary receipt refused to belong anywhere. Nathaniel pressed the intercom on his desk. "Margaret, would you come in for a moment?" His assistant entered almost immediately, carrying her tablet. She noticed the envelope still resting in front of him. You were still thinking about Miss Bennet. Nathaniel gave a faint smile. I thought this experiment would end today. Apparently, it is just beginning. He slid the receipt across the desk. I want to know everything about this transaction. Margaret examined the document carefully. The payment went through a regional financial office instead of directly to a business. That is unusual. Can you identify the final recipient? Not. Without requesting additional records. Nathaniel stood and walked toward the window overlooking the Hudson River. Do it. Margaret hesitated. Legally. Nathaniel turned around. Only through public records and proper channels. If Miss Bennet intended this payment to remain private, I will respect that. I simply want to understand what I am looking at. Within an hour, the compliance department began tracing the transaction. The merchant name itself revealed almost nothing. The payment had been processed on behalf of another organization through a small community financial office nearly 70 miles north of Manhattan. The amount itself remained modest compared with the spending made by the other three women, but every detail surrounding it seemed strangely indirect. Almost as if someone wanted the destination to remain invisible, one analyst quietly observed. Nathaniel folded his arms. People hide expensive purchases all the time. Nobody hides ordinary ones unless the ordinary purchase is not ordinary at all. The room became silent. As evening approached, Margaret returned carrying a thin folder. This is all we have so far. Nathaniel opened it immediately. There were no photographs of luxury properties, no invoices for artwork, no vehicle registrations. Instead, there were only maps, property records, and a brief financial summary connected to a small nonprofit organization located outside a quiet town along the Hudson Valley. The name meant nothing to him. He searched his memory. He had never donated there. Brooks Capital had never partnered with them. The organization had never appeared on any philanthropic list crossing his desk. What kind of nonprofit is it? He asked. Margaret slowly shook her head. That is the strange part. Public records are incomplete. Their annual reports stopped appearing almost 2 years ago. The organization still exists, but very little recent information is available. Nathaniel looked again at the map. The location sat far from busy highways, surrounded by old trees and narrow county roads. It was the sort of place successful executives rarely noticed while traveling between major cities. Does Claire have any connection to this town? Margaret answered carefully. None that appears in her employment records. Nathaniel remained thoughtful. Claire had worked inside his estate for almost 3 years. She arrived early every morning, left quietly every evening, never missed a shift, never asked for favors, and never volunteered stories about herself. Looking back, he realized he knew almost nothing about the woman who had quietly cleaned the rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. He closed the folder gently. Clear my morning schedule. Margaret looked surprised. You are going there yourself? Nathaniel nodded once. Some questions cannot be answered from a spreadsheet. He slipped the small white receipt back into its envelope and placed it inside his jacket pocket. It weighed almost nothing, yet somehow it felt heavier than every contract he had signed that year. Whatever Claire Bennet had chosen to do with that black card, Nathaniel could no longer dismiss it as a simple purchase. For the first time since creating the test, he had stopped measuring dollars. He had started searching for a reason. The next morning, Nathaniel Brooks left Manhattan before sunrise, driving north instead of sitting in the back of a chauffeured car for the first time in months. He preferred to see the road himself. The towering glass buildings slowly disappeared behind him, replaced by quiet highways lined with brilliant autumn trees glowing in shades of amber and crimson. The farther he traveled, the quieter the world became. His phone stopped buzzing every few minutes. The endless stream of business emails gave way to long stretches of silence, broken only by the gentle sound of tires rolling across the pavement. Nearly 2 hours later, he exited the interstate and followed a narrow county road that curved through farmland and small neighborhoods where front porches still held rocking chairs and handwritten welcome signs. It felt like another world. The address from the receipt finally led him to a modest brick building beside an old white church. There were no marble columns, no polished glass entrance. A small wooden sign stood near the sidewalk, its paint faded by years of rain and winter snow. The words were simple: Hudson Community Financial Services. Nathaniel parked across the street and remained inside the car for a moment, studying the building. Nothing about it explained why Claire Bennett had chosen this place. He stepped outside, adjusted his coat against the cool morning breeze, and quietly entered. A silver bell above the door rang softly. Behind a small reception desk sat an elderly woman wearing reading glasses attached to a thin silver chain. She smiled warmly before recognizing neither his face nor his name. It was a rare experience. "Good morning," she said. "How may I help you?" Nathaniel returned the smile. "I have a question about a payment that came through your office yesterday." The woman looked toward the receipt he gently placed on the counter. She adjusted her glasses and studied the document for several seconds. Her expression changed almost immediately. "Oh," she whispered. "That payment." Nathaniel noticed the softness in her voice. "Can you tell me what it was for?" She hesitated. "Normally we do not discuss private transactions." Nathaniel nodded respectfully. "I understand completely. I am not asking for personal information. I only wish to understand where the funds were directed." The woman remained silent for another moment before looking toward a framed photograph hanging on the opposite wall. It showed an old stone building surrounded by maple trees, with several elderly residents smiling together on a front porch. "The money did not stay here," she finally said. "We processed it on behalf of another organization because their banking services closed several months ago." Nathaniel followed her gaze to the photograph. "That building?" She smiled gently. "Yes." Nathaniel stepped closer. The photograph looked peaceful, comfortable. Time seemed to move differently there. "What is it?" he asked. "A small retirement home called Willow Creek House." Nathaniel waited. The woman continued quietly. "It has served this county for more than 50 years. Many of the residents have no surviving family. Some were teachers. Some were veterans. Some simply reached a point in life where they had nowhere else to go." Nathaniel looked back at the receipt. "And Claire Bennett sent money there." The woman folded her hands together. "She did." Nathaniel expected the explanation to end there, but the woman lowered her voice even further. "Yesterday morning the board voted to begin preparing for closure. Rising expenses had become impossible to manage. Several unpaid invoices were due by the end of the week. We believed we would have to relocate every resident before winter." Nathaniel felt something tighten inside his chest. And then Claire's payment arrived. The woman nodded slowly. "Less than an hour after the meeting ended." Nathaniel glanced once more at the modest receipt in his hand. The amount had looked almost insignificant compared with the fortunes spent by the others. Yet standing inside this quiet office, surrounded by faded photographs and handwritten thank you cards pinned to a bulletin board, it suddenly seemed far larger than any luxury purchase he had reviewed. Still, one question remained unanswered. He looked at the woman and asked softly, "Why would a maid from Manhattan choose to save a retirement home nearly 70 miles away?" The woman looked toward the photograph again, her eyes growing thoughtful. "Perhaps," she said, "you should ask the people who have been waiting for her every Sunday for the past 15 years. The elderly woman gave Nathaniel Brooks careful directions before returning to her desk, and within 15 minutes he found himself driving along a quiet country road bordered by maple trees whose leaves drifted gently across the pavement. The air smelled of fresh earth and approaching winter. At the end of the winding lane stood a weathered stone building surrounded by a white wooden fence and a modest garden that had clearly been tended with love for many years. A hand-painted sign welcomed visitors to Willow Creek House. There were no security gates, no luxury landscaping, no polished entrance. Only a front porch lined with rocking chairs where several elderly residents sat wrapped in warm blankets, enjoying the afternoon sunlight as if time itself had slowed down for them. Nathaniel parked a short distance away and walked toward the building without introducing himself. Before he reached the porch, laughter floated through the crisp autumn air. It was soft, genuine, the kind of laughter that could never be purchased. One elderly gentleman noticed him first and lifted a hand in greeting. "You must be here to see Claire," he said with an easy smile. Nathaniel stopped for a brief moment. "Claire," the man chuckled. "She usually comes on Sundays, but sometimes she surprises us during the week if she can get away from work." Nathaniel looked around the porch. "She visits often?" An older woman sitting beside the gentleman smiled as though the answer were obvious. "Every week for years." Nathaniel remained silent. Another resident joined the conversation before he could ask another question. "She reads books to Margaret because her eyesight is fading. She fixes Harold's old radio whenever it stops working." She bakes apple pies with the kitchen staff every Thanksgiving. Last Christmas, she stayed until almost midnight decorating the dining room because she said nobody should wake up on Christmas morning without seeing lights. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. None of these people knew who he was. None of them were trying to impress him. They simply spoke about Claire as though speaking about a member of their own family. A cheerful volunteer opened the front door and recognized that Nathaniel appeared unfamiliar. "Can I help you?" she asked kindly. "I was hoping to learn a little about this place," he replied. She welcomed him inside. The hallway carried the comforting scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. Family photographs covered nearly every wall, although many of the smiling faces belonged not to relatives by blood but to volunteers, neighbors, and local schoolchildren who visited throughout the year. Handmade birthday cards hung beside framed watercolor paintings created during art classes. Nothing looked expensive. Everything looked loved. The volunteer led Nathaniel into a bright common room where several residents were putting together a large jigsaw puzzle. "Claire bought that puzzle," one woman said proudly after noticing his attention. She says finishing puzzles reminds us that every life still has missing pieces worth finding. Nathaniel smiled politely, but inside he felt increasingly unsettled. Every room revealed another quiet trace of Claire's kindness. A repaired bookshelf, fresh flowers in recycled glass jars, a stack of large print novels with handwritten notes tucked inside the covers wishing each reader a wonderful afternoon. None of it carried her name. None of it asked for recognition. Finally, the volunteer stopped beside an old piano near the fireplace. Resting on top was a faded photograph inside a simple wooden frame. It showed a teenage Claire standing beside an elderly woman whose silver hair was tied neatly beneath a blue scarf. Both were smiling with the unmistakable comfort shared by people who belonged together. Nathaniel looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Who is she?" he asked quietly. The volunteer's smile softened. "That is Eleanor Bennett." Nathaniel recognized the last name immediately. Claire's grandmother? The volunteer slowly shook her head. No, she was never related to Claire by blood. Nathaniel frowned slightly. Then why does Claire carry her last name? The volunteer looked toward the photograph again before answering. Because when Claire was 12 years old and had nowhere else to go, Eleanor told her something that changed her life forever. She said, "Family is not always the name you are born with. Sometimes it is the name given to you by the first person who refuses to let you face the world alone." Claire kept that name ever since. And every time she walks through that front door, she says she is simply coming home. The photograph remained in Nathaniel Brooks's hands long after the volunteer had stepped away to help another resident. He studied the smiling faces inside the worn wooden frame. Claire looked no older than 16. Eleanor Bennett rested one gentle hand on the young girl's shoulder. And although neither wore expensive clothes nor stood inside an impressive home, there was a quiet confidence in their expressions that money could never manufacture. Nathaniel carefully placed the photograph back on the piano, exactly where he had found it. As he turned toward the hallway, he noticed an elderly man slowly approaching with the help of a polished wooden cane. His steps were unhurried, but his eyes carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize genuine character. "You are the gentleman from New York," the man said with a warm smile. Nathaniel nodded politely. "I am." The man extended his hand. "My name is Harold Whitmore. Claire says every stranger deserves a proper welcome." Nathaniel shook his hand. "She speaks about me?" Harold laughed softly. "Not by name. She rarely talks about herself or the people she works for. She always says everyone deserves privacy." Nathaniel felt another quiet surprise settle inside him. Claire had spent years inside his home, yet she had never used his name or his success to impress anyone. Harold slowly walked toward the front porch, and Nathaniel followed beside him. The afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the old wooden floorboards. Birds drifted lazily through the clear autumn sky, while several residents enjoyed warm cups of tea wrapped in both hands. Harold lowered himself into a rocking chair and motioned for Nathaniel to sit beside him. "Do you know why Claire keeps coming back here?" Harold asked. Nathaniel answered honestly. "I thought I did. Now I am not so sure." Harold looked across the small garden where bright chrysanthemums bloomed despite the cooling weather. Years ago, when Claire first arrived here, she barely spoke above a whisper. She had lost more than most children should ever lose. She carried everything alone because she believed asking for help would make her a burden. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. Eleanor changed that, Harold continued. She never gave Claire grand speeches. She simply left an extra plate at dinner every evening, folded another blanket on cold nights, and reminded her that kindness is often quiet. Claire learned that lesson well. A gentle breeze stirred the maple leaves overhead. Harold smiled, as though remembering hundreds of small moments. When Eleanor became sick, Claire worked after school cleaning offices and serving tables just to help with medicine and groceries. She never complained. She only said she was paying back love with gratitude. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Every sentence seemed to erase another assumption he had carried about the young woman who quietly cleaned his estate each morning. Harold reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper that had clearly been opened many times before. A few months before Eleanor passed away, she wrote Claire a short note. Claire asked if I would keep a copy. Nathaniel remained silent as Harold read the faded words aloud. If life ever gives you more than you need, do not spend your first thought on yourself. Spend your first thought on the people who once carried you when you had nothing. Harold carefully folded the note again. Claire has lived by those words ever since. Nathaniel looked toward the entrance of Willow Creek House, where volunteers were helping several residents prepare for dinner. Every smile he had witnessed that afternoon suddenly seemed connected by an invisible thread leading back to Claire's quiet generosity. Then another thought entered his mind. He remembered the amount printed on the receipt. It had not been enough to secure the future of an entire retirement home. It could only have delayed the crisis. Nathaniel slowly turned toward Harold. The payment Claire made yesterday, he asked gently. Did it save this place? Harold's smile softened, but this time there was sadness behind it. He looked across the porch before answering in a voice almost carried away by the wind. No, son. It only bought us another 30 days. Harold's final sentence lingered in the cool afternoon air long after he had stopped speaking. Nathaniel Brooks remained completely still, his eyes fixed on the quiet garden where golden leaves drifted gently onto the grass. 30 days. That was all Claire Bennett had managed to buy. Not because she lacked compassion. Not because she lacked determination. Simply because one woman working as a maid could only carry so much. Nathaniel slowly exhaled. Throughout his career, he had negotiated acquisitions worth billions of dollars without feeling the weight that now settled quietly across his shoulders. Harold looked toward him with a gentle smile. She thought nobody here would ever know who made the payment, he said. We only found out because the financial office accidentally mentioned her first name while confirming the transfer. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Did she ask them not to tell anyone? Harold nodded. She always does. A volunteer appeared at the front door carrying a tray filled with warm tea and freshly baked cookies. Residents slowly gathered together, laughing over small conversations that seemed wonderfully ordinary. Nathaniel watched them for several moments. No one complained. No one spoke about losing their home. They simply enjoyed another peaceful afternoon together, unaware that time was quietly running out. Does Claire know the payment was not enough? Nathaniel finally asked. Harold smiled sadly. She knows. Then why did she do it? Harold answered without hesitation. Because she believed 30 more days together were better than giving up today. Nathaniel looked down at his hands. That answer struck him harder than any business negotiation he had ever lost. He had spent years measuring success through outcomes. Claire measured it through hope. Even when the result could not solve everything, she still believed buying another month of dignity mattered. A few minutes later, Nathaniel quietly thanked Harold and walked toward his car. Before opening the door, he turned back for one final look at Willow Creek House. Through the front window, he saw volunteers setting tables for dinner while several residents carefully folded napkins together. It looked less like an institution and more like a family preparing for another ordinary evening. During the drive back toward Manhattan, the silence inside the car became almost reflective. The towering skyline gradually reappeared on the horizon, yet for the first time in years it seemed smaller than the lessons he had learned in one quiet afternoon. By the time he arrived at Brooks Capital, the office had nearly emptied for the day. Margaret Ellis looked surprised when she saw him return without his usual confidence. Did you find your answer? She asked softly. Nathaniel removed his jacket and carefully placed the folded receipt onto his desk. I found the wrong question. Margaret waited. Nathaniel looked toward the enormous windows overlooking the city. I thought I was testing 4 women. He paused for several seconds before continuing. Instead, one of them exposed how little I understood about generosity. Margaret glanced at the receipt. What would you like to do? Nathaniel walked slowly toward the bookshelf where awards, business trophies, and framed magazine covers documented decades of success. None of them seemed especially important anymore. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, schedule a meeting with the board of Brooks Foundation. Margaret immediately opened her tablet. How much would you like to authorize? Nathaniel shook his head. Not yet. She looked confused. Nathaniel turned toward her with an expression she had rarely seen. If I simply write a check today, I will only be solving a financial problem. He looked once more at Claire's receipt resting on his desk. Claire did not give them money because she wanted recognition. She gave them time because she loved the people inside that house. Margaret slowly nodded as understanding began to replace confusion. Nathaniel continued. Before I make any decision, I need to speak with the one person who never intended for me to know any of this. He carefully picked up the small white envelope and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket once again. The black credit card had started as a test designed to measure character. Now the smallest receipt it had ever produced had become a mirror, quietly reflecting the limits of his own understanding. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Brooks realized that true wealth was not measured by how much someone could spend in a single day, but by how many lives they quietly carried without expecting anyone to notice. The following Monday morning arrived like any other at the Brooks estate. Sunlight poured through the tall windows while the household quietly followed its familiar routine. Claire Bennett moved through the hallways with the same steady pace she had always carried, carefully, arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases before dusting the bookshelves in Nathaniel Brooks's private library. Nothing about her suggested she knew where he had been over the weekend. Nothing about her hinted that the quiet life she protected had already changed another person's heart. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for several moments without speaking. For the first time since Claire had begun working in his home nearly 3 years earlier, he noticed the details he had somehow overlooked. The way she straightened every picture frame before leaving a room. The way she carefully opened the curtains so the morning light reached every corner. The way she treated someone else's home with the same care she had shown the people at Willow Creek House. Claire, he finally said. She turned immediately. Good morning, sir. Nathaniel reached into his jacket and removed the black credit card. He walked toward her and placed it gently on the polished wooden table between them. I believe this belongs to you. Claire looked at the card but made no effort to pick it up. The test already ended. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Yes, it did. A quiet silence settled between them. Then Nathaniel placed the small white receipt beside the card. Claire's eyes rested on it for only a second before she understood everything. She did not look frightened. She did not look embarrassed. She simply lowered her gaze. You went there, she said softly. I did. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. I never wanted anyone to know. Nathaniel answered just as quietly. I know. She looked toward the window where the autumn breeze stirred the trees outside. Eleanor spent the last years of her life believing nobody would ever be forgotten inside that house. After she passed away, I promised myself I would keep visiting. I could never replace what she gave me, but I could keep one promise. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. When you handed me that card, Claire continued, I realized I finally had a chance to help them stay together a little longer. I knew it would not solve everything. I only hoped it would give them more time. Nathaniel looked down at the receipt. You spent your first thought on the people who once carried you. Claire's eyes widened slightly. Harold showed you the letter. Nathaniel smiled gently. He did. Another quiet silence followed, but this one felt different. It carried understanding instead of uncertainty. Nathaniel picked up the black card once more and held it toward her. I would like you to keep this. Claire slowly shook her head. No, sir. Why? She smiled with the same quiet grace he had witnessed throughout the weekend. Because I already used the opportunity exactly the way I wanted. Nathaniel remained motionless. She had refused one of the rarest financial privileges in America without the slightest hesitation. Not because she lacked ambition. Because she had already found something she valued more. Nathaniel carefully returned the card to his pocket. Then allow me to ask one more thing. Claire waited. Would you be upset if someone else decided to help Willow Creek House? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Not if they did it for the people who live there. Nathaniel smiled. That is exactly the reason. Within days, Brooks Foundation quietly established a permanent endowment that secured the future of Willow Creek House for generations to come. The announcement carried no mention of Nathaniel Brooks. It carried no mention of Claire Bennett. The official statement simply described a commitment to preserving dignity, community, and compassionate care for older Americans. Months later, Harold Whitmore sat on the same front porch watching another autumn afternoon unfold. Children from the local elementary school laughed in the garden while volunteers prepared dinner inside. The house was no longer counting down 30 days. It was planning holiday celebrations months in advance. Harold smiled as Claire arrived carrying 2 homemade apple pies. "Looks like you are home again," he said. Claire smiled back. "I never really left." Hundreds of miles away, inside his Manhattan office, Nathaniel kept one ordinary white receipt framed beside awards worth millions of dollars. Visitors often asked why such a plain piece of paper occupied a place of honor. Nathaniel always gave the same answer. "That receipt reminds me of the day I stopped measuring wealth by what people could afford to buy and started measuring it by what they quietly chose to protect." And every time he looked at it, he remembered a lesson no black card could ever purchase. The quietest people are often carrying the richest hearts, and the greatest acts of generosity are usually the ones that ask to remain unseen.